Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is Professor Hamamoto. The date is October 26, 2025, and the time 4 p.m. PDT. And today I have provided for you a critique, an analysis, mostly commentary of this instant bestseller, Nobody's Girl, subtitled A Memoir of Surviving Abuse and Fighting for Justice by Virginia Roberts Giuffre. And it's co-authored and edited and annotated, I believe, by Amy Wallace. I say believe because there's no footnotes as such. There's no index, but as Amy Wallace herself has expressed, her job involved much more than just transcribing and acting as a stenographer. Amy Wallace had to go and verify or disconfirm any lapses of memory that Virginia Roberts Giuffre might have experienced. Fact check it, in other words. And then it went to the publisher, and it's a large publisher. I'm sure they have a whole team of experts in the law, libel, for example. And remember, this is also being published in the UK, and they have a set of libel and slander laws that are different from that in the US. So they have to be maybe split the difference, or maybe there's a different version of the book. I don't know. This is thanks to my Patreon supporters. Right off the press, I got it the very day it was delivered, the very day it was officially published. And I say that because this will be a first printing, first edition. And I suspect because of the content in here, there's no names in here mentioned, personal names that are mentioned that aren't already out there. In fact, that might be one of the criticisms, is that some of the identities have been purposely withheld, I think primarily so that the larger message could get out and go skirt some of the more restrictive libel and slander laws that are in the UK. There was a very famous, at least in the academic world, case that involved a professor in the US, American. Her name is Deborah Lipstadt, against the publisher. I think it was Penguin. I think Penguin was involved with this publisher as well. This is Knopf, Alfred A. Knopf, but it's probably owned by one of the larger, I don't know which one, I haven't checked, publishing conglomerates, but they're large enough where they can sustain if there's any challenges in the court to the material here. And I mentioned this at the outset because there's just so many mechanical, maybe that's the wrong choice of words, there's so many legalistic hurdles that have to be overcome in order to get very simple truth out, simple but complex truths out to the public. So I would like to congratulate and thank in posthumously Virginia Roberts Giuffre for getting her testament out to the public, and then her co-author, editor, annotator, and spokesperson, really. And I've seen a few interviews with Amy Wallace, and we'll take a look at one of them here today before we finish up. So I want to congratulate Amy Wallace and also the publishers, the law team that was involved, and I'm sure they went through it line by line because you're dealing with the highest tiers of Anglo-American political establishment. That includes the people who are in the economy, academia, celebrities, yeah, of course. But I mean, I'm talking about above the celebrity level that we're used to, right? And for this reason, and these reasons and more, this book here, Nobody's Girl, is one for the ages. And I encourage all of you to purchase or download the audio version. I have both, by the way. I got this advanced copy thanks to the Patreon supporters. It wasn't advanced, it was pre-ordered, let's say. And then I downloaded it immediately, the audiobook version, which is word for word. And I would like to compliment the readers, the voice actors for the audio version. They did a really good job. And I will just share with you the story of a dear friend of mine and colleague, and she's on the show from time to time. And in fact, she's going to be coming on in a couple of weeks after she reads her copy of Nobody's Girl. I'm talking about Lena Pooh. And Lena told me that she ordered several copies. She was a little bit late, so she couldn't get one. It was already sold out by the time she placed her order. But she did buy 2 copies for her sister-in-law, for their daughters to read. They're not old enough really to be exposed to this type of material at their young age, but it's going to be in their mother's hands so they can help make the children aware that this is the world that they're entering into. And you can shield and protect and advise children or the naive or the unwary all you want, right? And that's necessary, but you can't really do enough in order to really inculcate a certain, and it's sad to say, wariness about the larger society. And I have no idea myself as a parent and a grandparent as to when that should be, what age. When do you start telling your children the real facts of life, and that there's this really evil, dirty, nasty men? Most of them are men, but as we're seeing in this book, there are a lot of women that are complicit in this system of exploitation. I call it hyper exploitation, so that I don't get dinged for saying some forbidden phrase. So that's what I mean when I say hyper, because most adults, women particularly, and men and boys, children, are exploited to some degree or another, but there's a whole other level that involves, the really unseemly type of physical and mental abuse that some children, some human beings are exposed to. And that's what I mean when I'm talking about hyper exploitation. All right, it's kind of a way to encapsulate that. If you read the book, you'll understand why I'm kind of circling around some of these really horrible encounters and terms. And Virginia Roberts Giuffre hits them head on. And it was a revelation to me, for example, that she had this whole other horrific set of experiences before she was a teenager and ran into the Epstein-Maxwell milieu. And this was within her own family. All right. And as early as age 7, she was exposed to what I've already referred to as super exploitation. Okay, now I'll let you read for yourself the details when you pick up this book. So my friend Lena Pooh got 2 books for her sister-in-law. She bought 2 books for her kids as well. They're adults, so they can handle the material. And of course, she has her own copy. So it just gives you an idea of how this book can be used as a teaching tool, as a learning tool, so that Virginia Roberts Giuffre's life will not have been in vain after going through all these incredible experiences within her own family. And then the outside the family was equally fraught with exploitation and danger. And in spite of this, she tried to live a adult life as a family person with 3 children of her own and a husband. Most of you know the story that they, as a couple, left the US and they went to a remote area in Western Australia and had a ranch where they could keep animals and live some semblance of a normal family life. And after having done that for 5 years, Virginia Roberts Giuffre gets hauled back into her previous life as a super exploited individual within the Epstein Maxwell camp, because as you know, Epstein was reeled, and later Maxwell were reeled back in to the justice system that they almost managed to escape. And you might say that Ghislaine Maxwell is escaping right now, and I'd like to say before we continue that she should be re-incarcerated, rearrested, and put in the facility to I think she was sentenced to 20 years, something. I might be wrong, but the long time. If anybody knows where she is now, I tried to find out because I was going to try to find a video of it and put it on here so that we could see her hanging out in the town where she's located in her country club type. I won't call it a prison. It's a fenced-in facility, let's call it, so that we can go down to the local In-N-Out Burger and see Ghislaine Maxwell having a double-double with a side of fries. Remember that photo? Right. So all kidding aside, this is an admission that complete justice has not been done, but it can be done if public pressure continues to mount. And I will take this time to congratulate you and thank you all in the public for not letting these issues die. Not only you're not letting the issues die, but you're pushing it forward. And the big boys and girls in charge, that includes Pam Bondi, right? Remember when we all thought that, gosh, once women get into the highest reaches of government, it's going to be such a humane society. Well, you've got Pam Bondi up there and she's a do-nothing, right? But if we continue to exert pressure, I sincerely believe that these appointed officials and elected officials will have to respond. Even Donald Trump, the President of the United States, the chief executive, is going to have to respond to public sentiment. We still have that power within ourselves, and we have enacted it. We, the public, have enacted it, and we've made our political will known. And it didn't require any sort of legislation, any lobbying, any petitions, or any special votes, or writing our congressman. We just went right to the source of the problem. So there's some good news involved in all this. We're learning it as we're going along that, yes, we the people do have a lot of power, political power, and it's beginning to be manifested, and we're going to continue the process. All right, before I go further, that's the preamble to a long and meandering talk here. I'm going to try to keep it down to, an hour and 10, 15 minutes, something like that. But before I go on, I want to recognize some of the books that helped me over the past several years to understand the system. Remember, we're talking about individuals, personalities, but let's remain cognizant of the fact that they are representatives of a underlying system of super exploitation. All right. And it's not unique to the Anglo-American societies, the UK and the United States. It's going on all over the world. But for now, we're talking specifically about Britain, the UK, and the United States of America. Right. So here's one by my friend and colleague that you've got to check out. You've heard enough about him, so I don't have to talk about. I've given talks about him a long time ago. Sean Atwood, and then you've heard me mention Kirby Summers' books. Here's one of her Q&A collections. I don't know if they're available. They're probably uh, available on ebooks at least, but I got hard copies. I believe in hard copies. This is about, you recognize this character Wexner, and of course that's Epstein, and they're connected at the hip even now. And we'd like to see, I'm speaking on behalf of the public, we'd like to see Leslie Wexner be brought to justice as well. He is, and it's through people like Kirby Summers, independent journalists, who are going to be helping realize this process. Who is he connected with, really? Who's protecting him? I don't think he's even been so much as questioned. I mean, you got Ghislaine Maxwell, who's a convicted jailbird, and she gets all these interviews from people like Todd Blanche, who needs to either resign and join a white shoe law firm. I'm sure they have no problem finding new employment, but he does not belong in the Trump administration. He's a liability, Todd Blanche. And you heard me earlier on the Sean Atwood show talking about his sycophantic interview with the oh so posh Ghislaine Maxwell. Right. So anyway, we're not going to dwell on too many people like Todd Blanche. I just had to get that out there. Here's another Kirby Summers title. Appropriately enough, Ghislaine Maxwell. This book was published, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years ago. She's been on the case a long time. Most of the people you're seeing now on TubeView found out about the whole system 3 weeks ago, and now they're experts on it, supposedly. At least they like to pretend so. And this is a book that I've always depended on. I've gone back to it over. This is third edition. It might be in the fourth edition for all I know, but this is Jeffrey Epstein, Predator, Spy. Get it? And now we have more details since this book came out on the nature of the intelligence relationship. So anyway, this is to say that this is a story that has been a long time coming, and this is the capstone. But that being said, there is still a lot of work for you and me to do, right? And I'll just give you one quick example here before we move ahead. This is just something I found in prepping for this talk here. I didn't know these documents existed. And as a service to my Patreon supporters, give me some time. I have to have dinner after this. But before I go to bed this evening, I'll publish this. I'll upload this document on my Patreon. So all you researchers and people who want to dig beneath the surface of the TubeView pop-up punditry, you can read these articles. Read the books, read the articles, read these sources, not the pre-digested glorified book reports that we see on TubeView. Some of them are good. I've been watching a lot of them, by the way. And I'm also looking at the reportage in the UK and also within the Commonwealth, that is Australia, because after all, that's where Roberts Giuffre was living before she supposedly took her own life, right? And then Canada as well. There's huge international interest. I don't know how this information is being received in Japan or any of the East Asian countries. They have their scandals themselves. I've seen some reports coming out of India. They're very much interested in the book here, Nobody's Girl, as well. So anyway, here's one report that I would like to mention in passing, just to show you that there's still a lot of work to be done here. It is an investigative report. I don't know how many pages total. See, it feels like about 20 pages or more. And this is part of a larger few hundred pages report that I managed to find. And the title is The Hidden Dominion, Epstein's Socio-Political Network and its Reach into Child Welfare. See, this is an area that I'm not hearing about in the coverage. I'm just hearing glorified book. Remember in grade school, the teacher would be doing her nails and the kids, me being one of them, would be up there doing book reports, and we're just repeating the plot line and some of the tidbits, but we're not really telling you what the book is about, or its deeper meaning, the implications of the book. It's a book report. I'm trying to go deeper than that. All right. So anyway, this is what I was referring to at the outset when I talked about the system. This person, this author, let me give him credit, Dominic Lacavera. He is the director of what's called Operation Black Velvet. That's their code name. This is an intelligence report. For which organization? I'm not really sure. It says OSS Command. I don't know what that is. But this was published recently, 2025, July 18. So I called it a system. He calls it a socio-political network. We are dealing with a network here. And networks are notoriously difficult to uproot, right? And we can start doing that by not being obsessed by personalities and start thinking in terms of networks and systems and find out how the system operates and then remove some of the key participants. We're on the way. We started, but we have some work to do here. And there's an executive summary here, and this is what caught my interest, and I hope there's researchers, writers, investigators who want to look at this report and take it further. But this particular section by La Cavera talks about the child welfare system as being one of the key sets of institutions that are involved in this socio-political network. That's his phrase, socio-political network. And he names in specific foster care and orphanages. All right. So he's aware of it. This is a government report, I think. I don't think it's a privately done report. But we'll find out. And there's all these different subsections. There's an executive summary, but it tells you the whole architecture of it. I like the way this author, Lacavera, thinks. I think he probably has training in the social sciences. He's definitely way above the pop-up pundit level. He's trying to understand the socio-political network, what I call, not me, but I adopted what we call verstehen, understanding, right? We have to get to a point of deep systemic understanding before we can hope to solve some of these problems. Are we going to uproot them now and forever? Realistically, probably not, because as you know, weeds keep popping up. You can have the most well-maintained, not to belabor the analogy, but you can have the most well-maintained golf course out there. Could be down in Mar-a-Lago, but there's always going to be weeds that crop up. But you can maintain them. You can hack them down, and you can create something at least that's on the level of managing. And right now, we're being overgrown by these creatures that are lurking amidst the weeds. And we're going to see that change. So he names all the, oh my gosh, he names, I'm talking about La Cavera, who mentions all these different characters in the institutions. He calls it the strategic matrix, proximity to power. Now, that's academic jargon for heads of state, including the British Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, Ehud Barak. These three are all named here. All right, so don't come and assassinate me. The public knows who you are. Okay, or come and try and assassinate me. I really don't care. I mean, you'd have to kill everybody on Earth now because everybody knows. Maybe you will do that with COVID 2.0. I don't know. So you got Ehud Barak. He was the former prime minister of Israel, right? Systemically, they keep popping up here like a weed. He talks about the tech and the finance barons. He names Bill Gates. You know the story about him and Mindy, as we affectionately refer to her, right? Melinda Gates. She said that, hey, man, this character Epstein was bad news. I had to divorce Billy Boy because I didn't want to share the same bed with some guy who's cavorting around down at Little St. James, or as Epstein called it, Little Eppie, or Little Jeffrey Island. There's Bill Clinton's name. You've got the name Ron Burkle, Thomas Pritzker. I'm going to go in on the Pritzker family, not now, but later on, because as a yellow person, I have a bone to pick with the Pritzker prickly family. They ripped off my people, the Japanese Americans, after World War II, and I'm gonna try to get that money back. The Pritzker, you built your whole empire, the Hyatt hotel chain, off of the yellow people. All right. And one of the reasons why I do this work, ladies and gentlemen, is to help ensure that we have the knowledge to know when these guys are coming towards us with a nice smile and some money that they're going to hand over to us to pay us off, or to some dinner arrangement or some piece of ribbon that they put on your chest. And we'll know what they're after. That's the Pritzker Prize for architecture. Anybody who's in architecture who's a recipient of the Pritzker Prize for architecture should return it. Send it back to Chicago. Send it back to Illinois. That's how crooked these people are. And of course, they're one of the most wealthy families in the United States of America anyway. And there's a governor, Pritzker. I call him Prickster. All right. Academics and scientists. We're going to get into this. This could be a whole talk on its own. This is my specialty. And in this book by Roberts Giuffre, it's chock full over and over again of academia that's at the center of this socio-political network. And that's my world, ladies and gentlemen. That's the world that I was in for decades. And these names I recognize. I've even met some of these people in my checkered career. And the knowledge, the direct experiential and professional, because I wrote about this and I lectured about this. So it's part of my professional competence. But I was so close to it, and I was so visible in the larger world outside of the academic world. Right. And I started when I broke the barrier and got onto the Alex Jones show. I think I was the first yellow person ever on his show, because it's basically a channel for John Birchers. And John Birchers have always been anti-yellow because supposedly their hero, John Birch, was tortured to death by the nasty Chi-Coms. Right. And Jews in Hollywood don't really like yellow people either, because they were kicked out of China and they were kicked out of Japan for bringing opium into the country and fucking up all the Chinamen, hooking them up on opium. and then putting really disparaging images of them on their movies and in their television and now on their YouTube and their Netflix. And that's why you will not see Professor Hamamoto on any of their shows. You get it? It's not called a blackout, it's called a yellow out. That's going to be part of the Pritzker critique as well. It goes deep. Goes deep, ladies and gentlemen. And you and me together, we are digging this trench here, and we're coming up with all the root system. Legal enablers and fixers. That's his term. Right? Lacavera, legal enablers and fixers, parentheses, lawyers, judges, consultants. Right? And we're going to talk about a couple of them in this talk here. One, David Boies. And I've read his autobiography and I think a second book about him. So I know his own self-perception. I know a little bit about him biographically. Now, I did not know about Siggy. Let's see, maybe I should show you a clip here. Let's take a look at the attorney. And, I'm skeptical, but let's give Roberts Giuffre the benefit of the doubt here. She really admires this woman, Siegfried Macaulay, or Siggy, as she affectionately calls her, because she really did. She really did go the distance on the behalf of her client.
Who is Sigrid Macaulay? She's a South Florida-based attorney with years of experience representing abuse victims. One of them, Virginia Giuffre, the woman who sued Prince Andrew for sexual assault, a case which helped bring down Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's sex trafficking ring. She is credited with helping to bring down billionaire Jeffrey Epstein, with implications reaching all the way to the royal family. South Florida attorney Sigrid Macaulay is considered one of the most famed and formidable lawyers in the U.S. and a national leader in sexual abuse litigation. Macaulay was at the center of one of the world's most high-profile legal battles, where she represented victims of Epstein's sex trafficking ring, seeking justice for those victims.
It's been a long time coming.
One of those victims was Virginia Giuffre. She was one of the first to come forward to accuse Epstein. Giuffre, who was just a teenager at the time of the abuse, pursued criminal and civil actions against Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and Prince Andrew. Epstein and Maxwell were found guilty and convicted, and Prince Andrew settled the sexual abuse lawsuit with Giuffre.
Ghislaine Maxwell has been convicted, is in prison. She'll be sentenced this summer, and there are other investigations still ongoing and things, so I do anticipate that there will still be more activity in those cases.
Macaulay, who worked free of charge for Epstein's accusers since 2015 and endured intimidation and threats throughout her defense, continues her pro bono work and is committed to stopping sexual predators. I had the chance to talk to
Okay, you can read about Macaulay, the attorney, in the Roberts Giuffre book. And you can suspend all the disbelief you might have about attorneys as a group. I myself will withhold any sort of commentary, but the trajectory is usually nobody works for free. All right, just get it straight. No one works for free. And the pattern is you work for the defense and, well, you work for the prosecution eventually. You bust enough dope dealers, then you become a defense attorney. All right. Remember, their first loyalty is to the bar, not to their client. But I'm not going to dispute Roberts Giuffre's devotion and even affection that she has for the attorney. Now, another example is David Boies. He's one of the fixers. He's one of the people who are classified as legal enablers and fixers boys, because I did learn from the writer Kirby Summers that Boies is not what he appears to be, okay? I've had attorneys myself, by the way, in fighting the University of California. I hired one for the first, because I was investigated, quote unquote, investigated twice, not once, but twice. I hired him the first time to see how it's done. That was my tutorial. And I managed to dodge the bullet. So another academic passed before they were able to try me for a second time because I wouldn't shut up. I wouldn't talk about the pedophilic, oops, I mentioned the word, network within the University of California system or higher education in general. When I'm learning about Epstein and his currying of academic types from Harvard to MIT is something I already knew about that was going on in my own institution. And I'm guessing it's going on in all higher education. But it's kind of like the clergy, or let me say more specifically, it's like the Catholic Church. Oh, these people are beyond reproach. Right? Look at that. They're devoted to the pure pursuit of knowledge. I'm sorry for laughing. Right. But, I felt the same way at a certain point in my development too. But eventually you figure out where the kicks are coming from. When I say kicks, not the joys, I mean the boots and the butt. Why certain types of situations seem to follow you around. You figure it out after a while. You go, oh, I get it. It's a cabal. Okay. So David Boies is part of this cabal, and he comes off. This is the perfect cover. He's avuncular. He's like your uncle or your grandfather. He's not this blustery Philadelphia lawyer type dude. He's just the opposite. You want to like him. He's high in the likability. He's intelligent. But I read his own biography and I found out that he was plucked out of obscurity by wife number 2, who saw something in him that could be used in high-level negotiations amongst the socio-political network that requires not just defense, but also offense. They own both ends. Remember, I was telling you my story about how I hired the lawyer first time when I was under quote unquote investigation. By the way, they never were able to pin anything on me. Right. And I do this YouTube channel is partly as an expression of revenge toward them. I'm not done with them yet. This is only partial revenge. Let's state it that way. But part of my motivation for doing this every Sunday is to talk about these miscreants who are miseducating your children and bringing the society down at the same time. That's part of their role, by the way. It's not because they're stupid. It's because they're going to the highest bidder, the big pharma people, the foundations, the Pritzker Foundation, people like that. That's who they work for. Those are the people who become the presidents of these elite institutions. And I'm sorry, I'm a ghetto boy, so I never could assimilate to that level of entitlement that these people feel is their birthright. So anyway, Boies was plucked out of obscurity to defend and as well as prosecute both ends of the party. He's playing both sides. Right. Just like my attorney was very well known. I picked up the body language and the cues as soon as I saw them meet each other, supposedly as opponents on the floor 7 of the administration building, Mrak Hall, M-R-A-K, Emil Mrak Hall. It's a big conference room there. I'm quite familiar. There's also a basement down there. I saw them, they locked eyes and they knew they were all part of the same club. I picked it up in just a slight glance. I said, oh, okay. I get it. They're on the same team. So I said, I'm going to learn all this. I'm going to absorb as much as I can, and I'm going to do whatever I can with guerrilla warfare, let's call it. Guerrilla warfare and remote viewing were my two-pronged strategy in this battle. But the point I'm trying to make is that they're all on the same side, and you're on the other side. You, John Q. Public. So when you say, well, we should sue the bastards, or let's write a petition, or let's put it to vote, let's appeal to congressman or congressperson A, B, or C, it's an ill-fated endeavor. Direct democracy is okay. We're doing it. We're not going to wait for our elected representatives to help us realize justice for Roberts Giuffre. So here's David Boies. You'll see what I mean. He's like Mr. Rogers. Remember Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood? I gave a talk on that 2 or 3 years ago. He comes out of Columbia School of Education. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was a psyop. It was all workshopped under the guise of public television. I always hated it. I thought he was a pervert, so I never watched it.
I think it's the defining civil rights issue of our time. This is an area where our government discriminates against its own citizens.
Leading trial lawyer David Boies is fighting to bring marriage equality to every state. It's a battle that Boies says is akin to the Black civil rights movement.
In the 60s, you had businesses saying we don't want to serve African Americans.
Boies, along with lawyer Ted Olson, took on California's Proposition 8 ban on same-sex marriage. The two friends were also adversaries on another landmark U.S. Supreme Court case, Bush versus Gore.
The leader of the free world was at stake.
The high-powered litigator also reflects on a personal struggle.
What it demonstrates is that dyslexia is not a disability, it's a difference.
I talked to David Boies recently in New York.
David Boies, welcome. Why did you get involved in the issue of gay marriage?
I think
Okay, David Boies portrays himself as Mr. Civil Libertarian, and he's a handicapped person. He has dyslexia, and that was in his book as well. And I'm not making fun of his disability, but I'm simply raising the question, how does a guy who can't read make it through law school, a good law school as well, and then ascends to the heights of white shoe lawyers to defend all these high profile cases? Because he can be trusted. He's one of them. Do you understand? So even though he did defend Roberts Giuffre and other co-defendants and has come on down on the side of justice in certain cases, he is part of the boys club, let's call it, just for the sake of convenience, right? And so is Siggy, whoever else, all these other characters. And so is, well, there's other attorneys. Let me just turn to the co-author. I think you should take a look at her as well. And she's seen, was trying to find information on her for a while. I thought she was the Amy Wallace of the Walenshinsky family. There was a pretty well-known popular novelist by the name of Irving Wallace. Irving Wallace. He wrote some pretty, I don't know if they're good or not. They were pop fiction. In the 1950s, he had a pretty big career. He might have wrote a movie or two, Irving Wallace, and they had two children, one David Walenshinsky. He took the name, the original immigrant name. He anglicized the name Walenshinsky to Wallace, right? And then he had a sister named Amy Wallace. And I thought they were the same people, but they're two different people. So don't get them confused, because the other Amy Wallace, the daughter of Irving Wallace, supposedly passed away a long time ago. So here's the other Amy Wallace, the one who is she refers to herself as a ghostwriter. I don't mean to disparage her. because that's not an easy task. She's the ghostwriter for this book, Nobody's Girl. And of course, as you know, Roberts Giuffre either committed suicide or was suicided back in April of this year. So she's unable to really talk about the book, right, herself. So Wallace has taken it upon herself to, by default, she doesn't seem like she wants to publicize her participation, but she's doing it more of an obligation. But anyway, Amy Wallace is briefly, well, it was an extended interview, but she's interviewed by none other than Katie Couric. And I'll mention the Couric connection in a moment, but let's take a look at Amy Wallace.
Really talked about the pardon of it all, but the idea that anyone in this administration is considering putting a pardon forward for Ghislaine Maxwell, a convicted sex offender, a convicted trafficker. And in this book, you see, she wasn't just the receptionist keeping the date book. She was
an active participant.
Absolutely. She was sexually abusing girls and young women herself. She was forcing them to sexually service her. She was hurting them during sex. There's a scene that, just eat your Wheaties before you read it. It's tough. She hurts Virginia using some sort of sex toy, if that's the right word for it, because she's angry at her. This is a vile sex offender. And if that woman is let out of the minimum security prison that she has now for some reason been moved into, I mean, all bets are off at that point. Like that sends the message loud and clear. We just don't care. We don't care that you're upset about it. We don't care that you don't like it, that rich people get to hurt poor people willy-nilly. We don't care. We're just going to do it. That's the message that's going to send. So, I mean, we'll see. We'll see what decisions are made. But again, if this book can try to somehow refocus the narrative on the accurate narrative about Ghislaine Maxwell, she was not a victim of Epstein. She may have had terrible things happen to her in her life previously, and for that, I feel sorry for her. But she took it out on others, and they were the youngest and most vulnerable among us.
Well, personally, I trust Amy Wallace for some reason. I mean, I can tell she's been to prep school, and she's probably a graduate of an elite women's college, Wellesley or Smith, one of the Seven Sisters, as they're called. I mean, she has that demeanor, but she does understand the class nature of the super exploitation that was taking place between people like, because I say like because it wasn't just her alone, like Virginia Roberts. This is before she was Giuffre, Virginia Roberts, and people of the Epstein milieu, and I can include Wexner milieu as well. Although he wasn't directly involved, he was financing, it seemed, a lot of this activity. This is something that needs to be teased out of the story. I think the Wexner connection right there. So she understands there's a class issue. She points out in the book, Wallace, I'm saying, through Roberts Giuffre, that Maxwell would go to high schools, I believe, not junior high, but high schools where the working class kids went and kind of look for girls that seem to be, they fit the profile, and they might be distressed, and they might be willing to accept money for favors, let's say. They did not go to the prep schools or to the high schools in the good side of Palm Beach or wherever it was. But she had a target person that was women or girls, really, of the underclass. They're the most vulnerable there. So I thought that was really an important point that Amy Wallace was making here. Now, Katie Couric itself, I was amazed. Well, maybe I shouldn't be amazed. I was somewhat surprised to see Katie Couric being mentioned by Roberts Giuffre herself for being on the guest list of Jeffrey Epstein. This is on page 222. She mentions, I'm just picking names that you would know, the general public would know, but there are many more names. Some of them I didn't know. But people at the Epstein parties included Katie Couric. She was a buddy. It's all one club, you know that. Chelsea Handler. I know she's been struggling for ages to become an A-list celebrity, but she hasn't ever been able to get over the hump. And I've been looking at her quite, for a long time. So I read her book about how she likes to sleep with X, Y, and Z. Can't remember the name of the book, but she's one of these LA women, whatever that means. And ostensibly she's a comedian. And another name is Charlie Rose. And you know what happened to him? I used to watch Charlie Rose show. He's one of the best interviewers around. And he would interview people that I'm interested in. Writers, directors, performers, not celebrity people who had some level of accomplishment in their field of endeavor. That's Charlie Rose. Then he later on, as you know, got in trouble for overstepping his bounds. I don't know the specifics of it, but he had a fall from grace himself. That's Charlie Rose. Turns out Charlie Rose was kind of thorny. George Stephanopoulos. George Stephanopoulos is gay. He's been gay since the jump. George Stephanopoulos goes back to the Carter administration, I believe. And by this time, he should be married to a man or a woman. I don't know, but he's suspect. But George Stephanopoulos is an ABC figure because he made his bones working for Jimmy Carter, I guess. So for those of you who are doing investigative reportage, let me put forward the name George Stephanopoulos and see what you can find on him. I'm sure it's going to be pretty interesting, let's say. Who else? Woody Allen. Okay, that's Woody Allen. That's not surprising at all. And I mentioned him because we're going to get into the Korean connection presently. Because we're talking about super exploitation, right? We're going to go way beyond Roberts Giuffre and the dozens and scores of women within the Wexner, Epstein, Maxwell milieu. We're going to include, of course, I'm a yellow person. We're going to talk about yellow women as being super exploited. Children, too. And it goes beyond SUNY prep. You know the whole story. I know it quite well. I used to lecture about it. I taught a class in Asian American sexuality. So I use the Woody Allen Königsberg. That's his name. He anglicized his name from Königsberg to Allen. Like we wouldn't know that he was Jewish? Come on. Oh, man. If you're a Jew, be proud of. You have a lot to be proud of. Got a great heritage, right? Just return to the Torah, return to the book, return to your religious tradition. You've turned your face away from God. You became atheists. You come from a family of rabbis like Freud and Marx. You all turned away from it and went into atheism. You all turned into Sabbatean Frankism. You became secularized. You turned your face away from God. And this is why the temple is being destroyed yet again. Anyway, I didn't mean to go off on some sort of prophetic mission here, but that's Woody Allen, I read the literature, I read all the books, I read the ones from Mia Farrow's perspective. Sun Yi has not written the book. I'm waiting for that to happen. She might have to wait till the woodman croaks off, and then she'll tell us the true story of what went down in that relationship. But I've also read the book done by Ronan Farrow, an excellent writer, researcher, right? And he has not a good relationship with his, I don't know, I hesitate to call him a stepfather. He was like a sexual predator within the family, right? So that's wrong. At least Ronan Farrow came out okay. And he was one of the chief publicists of what later became the Me Too movement. That's Ronan Farrow. That's one of the sons of Mia Farrow, right, who's a historian herself. And so was going back to her mother and her father, the director and the actress, into Hollywood golden age, right? They're like Hollywood royalty. So we had Woody Allen and, well, I'll leave it at that. Some of the academic types, page 237, Marvin Minsky. It was really interesting on page 237 to see what Roberts Giuffre had to say about Marvin Minsky. She had to service him. She said it was like being with some guy with a shriveled up peach head. You know, he must have been in his 70s, 80s. I can't remember. He's dead now. But he's the father, one of the co-founders of AI, which is all the rage right now. Right, with Chat GPT. They're trying to shove that down our throat and up our arse. That's marvelous Marvin Minsky. But apparently, he wasn't interested in building himself his own sex robot. He should have made one of his own, that put batteries in it, and, he could just pleasure himself with it. He didn't have to go fly on the so-called Lolita Express down at Little St. James Island multiple times, but he did. And Virginia Roberts, she was still Roberts at the time, so I'll just use her one name. That's what Virginia Roberts details on page 237, Marvin Minsky. Because as I told you before, when I'm hearing all these names in academia, I know who these people are and what they represent. Now on page 257, there's a little bit of a clinker, and I'm not going to complain. There's a quote by Margaret Mead. She was the anthropologist. Can't remember where. I think she taught at Columbia. But she was the lesbian lover of Ruth Benedict. This is all inside baseball for those of you. But for the average person, you should know that she was the one that came up with this idea that it just takes a few people to make a big difference, right? I'm paraphrasing. And I agree with that. But she herself was a sleazebag, and so was Ruth Benedict. They were supposedly anthropologists, and they were just making up a bunch of bullshit about primitive peoples, like coming of age of Samoa. I had to read all this stuff myself, and I was fascinated by it. Only later, I think his name was Freeman, wrote a whole book on Ruth Benedict and Margaret Mead, saying this whole thing was a fabrication. She was only on Samoa for a very, very short time, and later, this guy who wrote the book about her so-called research or anthropological research found out that all the native people, all the Samoan people, were bullshitting her. They were just having her on, as they say in Britain. They were pulling her leg. Because he went back there and talked to these people, and they said, "Oh yeah, we remember her. She gave us some coconuts, and we just told her a bunch of bullshit, and she took it home, and she was a huge public intellectual of her time. She was like one of the progenitors of what later became the sexual revolution. Because, this is how primitive societies work. There was equality between men and women, and they all shared the chores. and the women didn't wear bras, and the men let their dingleberries hang out beneath their thongs, and she was even balling some of them. I think some guy was servicing her. It was a Mandingo was his name. No, I made that part up, but you get the idea. So anyway, I can go on. I'm not going to nitpick. I'm just telling you, these are the people that we are taught about at school. There were all these icons: Marvin Minsky, Margaret Mead. Who else? Oh, she mentions, we're talking about Roberts Giuffre now. Page 288, she mentions Larry Nasser. He was a doctor of osteopathic medicine, but he was the team physician of USA Gymnastics for the women. Right? This is the parent organization that coordinates all of who gets to go to the Olympics. I'm putting it in a nutshell. He was also a staff physician, OD, not MD, for Michigan State University. And he taught kinesiology, something like that. He had a professorial ranking as well as being the team doctor. But he was a molester of girls and women. And that was being suppressed for years and years and years by all these larger institutions because, as this person here, Mr. or Dr. Lacavera calls it, this is part of the socio-political network that they're part of. So that's and I've given a talk on this before, right? Because as I mentioned before, the university, just like the clergy, are the two major institutions that promulgate this whole system of super exploitation. And they get away with it because they supposedly are above carnality. They're just dealing with matters of the spirit and the mind, suppose. But these are the most rapacious, salacious, carnal, venal individuals that walk the earth. And both institutions handle their problems with one simple method. And it's so pervasive, it even has a term. It's called pass the trash. So if you have one priest here who's abusing or super exploiting girls or boys or men and women at one parish, they pass the trash to another parish, or something. They put them out of the country. And then they proceed with the system of super exploitation. Same way with the university. You had Linda Katehi, who was the disgraced chancellor of UC Davis, who gassed students with bear repellent, and she was finally taken down. And guess who? I was one of her ardent foes. They passed the trash on her. Now she's a professor at Georgia Tech or some other institution. She's now drawing a second pension. She was making close to $1 million as the chancellor of UC Davis already. And she was having all kinds of side action. But the thing is that she was given these deals by people who were compromising her, so she'd have to make decisions that were favorable to them and their institutions. And when they had to get rid of her, then they can pull out that information, and then she can go over to Georgia Tech or wherever she is. And there's another, her vice chancellor was her henchman. I'll talk a little bit about him as well. They passed trash on him. All these guys left. They all left before I left, by the way. And Janet Napolitano left before I left as well. I'm not going to say I'm responsible for it, but I sure gave it the college try, didn't I? And I something like 3 of the 4 or 5 attorneys from the UC. I'm just telling you this because it can be done, but you have to know the history. You have to get in their heads. You have to know the psychology. And you really have to have a lot of information. You have to be able to research who they are, their biography, explore their vulnerability. You're doing the field generalship here, and you can tell by my excitement that I enjoy that kind of stuff. So they picked the wrong Oriental to fuck with, right? And you can be the wrong human being that this socio-political network is trying to jack with as well. You can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. And you are learning the process here, right? You are learning. There's a system, there's a structure, there's a tuition, which means learning. These are learned skills. You don't come at it by some sort of flash of insight. You observe and you observe. So I'm trying to pass on this information to you to share it. Join my Patreon. Subscribe to this channel. There's a lot of survival information on here. It's more than about bread and water. It's about psychic warfare here. So anyway, I found out that Ghislaine Maxwell herself liked to be called G-Max. I said, oh my gosh, does she think she's gangsta? She's just a spoiled woman. By the way, it's not in the book here, but I've read books and articles about Robert Maxwell. Her mother wrote a book. I read that one. So I have a kind of pretty good understanding of their family dynamics. I suspect that she herself, Ghislaine Maxwell, was a victim at the hands of her own 500-pound father. He was probably slimmer back then. Robert Maxwell, Sir Robert Maxwell, British knight Maxwell. I think there was a mother or a daughter and father incest relationship there, just like there was in the case of Virginia Roberts. Well, I'll let you read that on your own here. Okay, so that's G-Max. And then she talks about one of my favorite whipping boys, Joey Ito, right? He's a yellow man. I'm embarrassed to say, but Joichi Ito is a yellow boy. He was the guy that ran the MIT Media Lab, but even then, he was just a flunky. He was a flunky for the intelligence-connected Negroponte family. I'm sure if you traced it back, why don't you do it, somebody here? Trace back the Negroponte back to Florence or the black nobility. I'm sure the bloodlines go way back. But Nicholas and John Negroponte insinuated themselves in the U.S. intelligence apparatus, of which MIT is an integral part, and they set up this rent boy named Joichi Ito to be the head of the MIT Media Lab, and he was the contact boy for Jeffrey Epstein to funnel tons and tons of money. I have the exact sum here. I don't know it off the top of my head. I have all the reports, by the way, issued by their self-study reports by Harvard University, MIT. They're all available online. I have them. If there's interest, I'll post them on my Patreon. Maybe it's only of interest to nerds like me, but it gets into the dollars and cents. But this is where I'm getting this information that I'm sharing with you now. This is not something that's the product of my imagination. This is based on documented fact-finding information by the institutions themselves, as flawed as they might be. This is MIT Joichi Ito. Let me give you a little bit of background very quickly on this yellow boy. By the way, he since has gotten not just his bachelor's degree, but he has a PhD now. I don't know what in. And I mention that because he got the job at the prestigious MIT Media Lab without even having so much as an undergraduate bachelor's degree. let alone graduate degree. Wow, he must have had done a lot of fellatio in order to get to that level. But that's where he was, because he comes from Tokyo. Kabukicho is the prostitution area. Let me just step back a little bit. Like, after World War II, the U.S. government took over the government of Japan. It was Imperial Japan. They took over for a few years. This is called the U.S. Army of Occupation. This is when General MacArthur was sort of like the new daimyo of post-war Japan. And they had all these Japan experts come in. There were people probably from missionary families, Methodist, Baptist, Catholic priests whose families had grown up in Japan. So they were fluent in the language. They were literate. But most of them they were also gay. So early Japan studies, and this is also true in China, East Asian studies, which is monopolized even to today by Yale, Harvard, wherever there was an opium cartel, that's where they have the Japanese, Korean, East Asian studies cartels, language, culture, artifacts, museum. It's funded by this opium relationship that you know about through the East India Society and the Sassoons and the Kaduri and all the other drug peddlers that were stationed in Asia, which was really what World War II was about. It was about the drug trade and the drug cartel. Not all of it, but much of it was. So anyway, Joichi Ito was recruited by those guys in Kabukicho. They were all screaming gays who'd like to sodomize smooth yellow butts of Japanese rent boys like a Joichi Ito. And they recruited him and they brought him over to America to run this media lab. Isn't that incredible? This intellectual center of excellence. And some rent boy they put in there. And by the way, his sister also teaches. She teaches at UC Irvine. I forgot her. I think her name is Mimi. Maybe that's her nickname, but her name is Ito if you want to look her up. And guess what she specializes in? My favorite area. Not really. I don't really know much about it. I'm fascinated by it, but I don't have any expert knowledge of it. But her research specialty is video games. The experiential, the cognitive, the neurobiology of video games. This is what she does at UC Irvine. So it's a family affair, but she does have a PhD. She does have academic credentials. So you can imagine my excitement when I'm seeing these names, because I've been following Joey Ito for years and years and years, and I've been threatening to write about him and his ilk for years and years. By the way, I've been to Japan many times, and I've lived there for extended periods, at least twice. So during my travels, I would go and meet some of these old Japan hands who had come to post-war Japan when it was dirt poor, like 1946. And that's where I got to learn about the sexual culture of all these guys I knew from afar. They were the translators of all these classics. They're the ones who brought to prominence people like Mishima Yukio, who turned out to be a flaming gay rent boy. But they made him into a literary hero, and they translated all his major work. This is Mishima. So taught me about how intellectual history is really made. So all these names as translators, they were teaching at Columbia, Yale, or Harvard. These guys were all part of this sodomy network. So we're talking about super exploitation and trafficking. It filters into all the different institutions. All the Japanese literature in translation to English are translated, selected, handpicked by rice kings. These were American or British, typically, translators who were gay and liked to screw Japanese boys. And sometimes they would take trips over to South Korea to do the same thing. It's kind of like our friend from last week, and it turns out I've done 3 talks on him so far, Ed Buck. He had a preference for black flesh. Well, there's some that are rice queens. They like yellow meat, boys, right? So you see how when we talk about Virginia Roberts Giuffre, it goes in all kinds of directions. And I can see how it fits into myself, how it fits into this larger pattern of super exploitation. And race plays a central part in it, not just gender, but race and class, social class, as Amy Wallace reminds us. So she talks about Leslie Wexner, 340s. There needs to be a book about him, an entire book dedicated to him. She talks about page 238, Interlochen, because Jeffrey Epstein and I think Ghislaine Maxwell put in some money as well to sponsor a entire cabin out in the deep woods of northern Michigan where Interlochen is located so that he can go in there and have his pick of all these talented musicians. And as many of you know, he had a high degree, let's say, facility on piano himself. He was no slouch. But he had his own little cabin out there where he can have these assignations, presumably with musicians. So Virginia Roberts Giuffre talks on page 338, the whole Interlochen experience. And if you remember a few years ago, maybe not that long ago, a couple years ago, I gave a talk on, what's her name? The singer. God, how can I forget her name? She was the one that was trying to sell us remote psychotherapy with avatars. Anyway, the point is she was an Interlochen graduate. There have been a number of them that have come out of there. So I thought it was interesting to see it resurface again in this book. And she talks a little bit about Maureen Comey and her prosecution and ran a few pages. Maureen Comey was working for the Southern District of New York at the time, as you remember. Seemed to do a pretty good job in prosecuting Ghislaine Maxwell. But again, it's one of those cases where they'll prosecute them on one day, the next day they'll be defending them, right? Because their loyalty is to the super class of super exploiters that find themselves entangled into the high-level judicial system. That's her job. And as you recall, not long ago, she was one of the key prosecutors for Sean John Combs. She blew that case purposely, I argued. And now, as you know, Puff Daddy might skate, just like I predicted a few months ago. It's a long time ago in media years. So she blew that, and that's her daddy is James Comey. And then Donald Trump fired her, or her people fired her from the Southern District. She'll wind up at another white shoe law firm. It's a revolving door. It's called Pass the Trash. Remember? Okay. So that about covers my critique, my own little emendations, my glosses on her revelations. I will conclude with some videos here of the brother, young by 5 years. His name's Skyby or Sky, and Virginia Roberts Giuffre has incredible affection for her baby brother. I mean, he's a grown man now, and he married to a woman who we'll see here in a moment. Her name's Amanda, And I saw it. I don't know what I was expecting, but I was really impressed by their level of understanding and their ability to express some very important points. One is that this is a systemic problem that we're being faced with here, and it's a crisis of the justice system in America. They really open up the travesty surrounding the Virginia Roberts Giuffre case, and by extension, Epstein and Maxwell and Wexner. And they put it in a broader sense. I'm not explaining it well, so let's hear them talk for themselves. This is a recommended interview. It's on Channel 4, which is in Britain, not Australia, the British Channel 4, which is kind of like PBS, it's not BBC, but it's public television in Britain. And their journalism's fairly good. And forgot the name of the woman. I have it here in my notes who did the interview, but here it is. Sky Roberts and Amanda Roberts.
And they were begging the world to believe them and fight for them.
She just continued to reiterate, like, what is it going to take for people to finally believe me? And by continuously being gaslit by the UK government, the UK Metropolitan Police, the US government here, her mind took a very large toll.
Virginia did first speak to the Metropolitan Police in London as far back as May 2015. They decided not to continue with any investigation. They reviewed that again in 2019, deciding again not to investigate. Is it time for them to review those decisions?
100%. What else does it have to take? I think the cost of proof is too high for these survivors.
Hello and welcome to The Forecast. In 2011, Virginia Roberts Giuffre became known as the most outspoken victim of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Her campaigning against their abuse and trafficking helped to get justice for many women, but she was perhaps best known for a now infamous photograph taken when she was aged just 17, meeting with Prince Andrew. She claimed it was taken prior to one of 3 times she was forced to have sex with the king's brother. They were encounters he denies took place, but which have led to his public downfall, with Prince Andrew reportedly paying around £12 million to Virginia Giuffre, formally ending a civil case brought against him in the US. Earlier this year, Virginia took her own life. Before she died, she wrote a memoir and made it clear that she wanted the world to read it. Today, I'm joined by her brother and sister-in-law, Sky and Amanda Roberts, to talk about the woman behind the headlines, the legacy she leaves, and the story that she wanted to tell in her own words. Can I just begin by asking you, Sky, I'm imagining it is a bittersweet moment. Virginia's story will be published tomorrow. Finally, in her own words, the whole story, but she's not here. That must be quite difficult for you.
Yeah, I think it's, the best way to put it is over the last couple of weeks, we've had a lot of happy tears and a lot of sad tears because we've had many moments where she's been vindicated because of her ability to tell her story. And I think people are finally realizing the magnitude of what she was able to accomplish during her time here. And, we're sort of left in place here on the advocacy piece. And a lot of people are like, well, why are you guys coming forward now? And the truth is that, she always wanted to protect us from these. I remember her so clearly saying, like, I never want this evil to touch you or anyone in this world. So it is really, really difficult to come forward, but she'd be really proud of this moment. It's a very vindicating moment for her.
I was going to ask you about exactly that. I have heard you speak really movingly about how much Virginia tried to protect you as her younger brother. There are clearly some really difficult details in the book that she feared she would die as a sex slave at the hands of Epstein. I mean, are there things that you have had to read, that you have had to face for the first time?
I think we knew a lot of the information that was going to come out. She was very transparent with us about sort of some of the intimate details that were going to be in there. However, it's very different when you read it on a page. I think growing up, I had known there were threats on my life, at least specifically from Epstein and Maxwell. That's something that she had shared with me. But it's just very different when it jumps out at you on the page. And, I want to be clear, like, it's crazy because you can hear her voice in that book. Like, I can read the pages and I just feel like I can hear her in there. And I want to commend, Amy Wallace and the Penguin Random House for coming out, because the truth is, like, it's a really hard read, but I think it's very impactful.
She suffered a great deal throughout her life. That is clear. One of the things that has struck me endlessly about this story is there's so much talk about how rich Jeffrey Epstein was, all his friends, the private planes, the private island.
Well, I'm going to end that there while her name is Jackie Long. She's the host of this Channel 4 forecast. She's pretty good as you watch it. And I would encourage you to listen to Amanda Roberts, what she has to say. She turns out to be a very, very perceptive critic of the socio-political network, as we've been speaking of. They understand it, and they know that the job is just beginning. So we're out of time here. I'm running on till almost 90 minutes, and I didn't even get to some of the other issues. I wanted to talk about the so-called troubled teen industry, right? Virginia Roberts was sent by her parents to one of these homes for truant teenagers primarily. And as you remember, I did a whole talk about Paris Hilton's revelations about her being so much as kidnapped from her own home and taken away to one of these so-called troubled teen facilities. That's the first time I learned that it was a multi-million-dollar business. And I said, wow, Virginia Roberts Giuffre, that's something that she shares with Perry Hilton. So that's another area that is pointed to by this Epstein assessment report about orphanages and child protection and that whole system, which is corrupted at all different levels, from the homes themselves all the way to the states that contract these services. So we do have a lot of work to do. Again, purchase this book, read it, send it to people you know as a gift, as a survival tool. It's inspirational, but it has a lot of important, hard information that you could use for a long time to come. So again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your support. We'll continue with this discussion. I've only scratched the surface here. I think next time I'll talk about the Korean connection, the Korean little Asians. We're talking about super exploitation here, but there's been trafficking or super exploitation we know this by now, between the U.S.-Mexico border. That's what the open borders was about to a large extent. We know about the exfiltration of Haitian children to the U.S. via the certain foundations that we can go into. But there's also been a robust, decades-long traffic between Asia, starting first in Japan, then South Korea, and then China was cut off not too long ago. Trafficking of children under the guise of benevolent adoption. So we'll talk about that complex. That's worthy of an entire talk, and how it articulates with the intelligence complex. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your patience. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share these insights with you today. I hope you'll talk amongst yourselves. And most importantly, remember this book as you ponder these issues. Thank you again. We'll see you next Sunday, God willing. Bye.